The silence before death sounds different in the mountains. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez had heard it 3 times before in his 8 years with SEAL Team 6, and each time it meant the same thing. Someone was about to die, and it probably wasn't going to be pretty. As he pressed his face against the cold Afghan soil, watching his squad of 12 elite warriors pinned down by enemy fire from 3 sides, that familiar silence crept over the battlefield like a predator stalking its prey. What Rodriguez didn't know was that 800 meters above them, a ghost was already taking aim. The year was 2011, and Operation Neptune's Fury was supposed to be a simple extraction mission. Intelligence had located a high-value Taliban commander holed up in a mountain compound near the Pakistan border. Get in, grab the target, get out. Standard Tuesday for America's most elite fighting force. But as Rodriguez would learn in the next 6 hours, sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted, and sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. This is the true story of how 12 Navy SEALs found themselves in the fight of their lives, surrounded by an enemy that knew they were coming, and how one mysterious figure changed everything with a single shot that echoed across the mountains like thunder from heaven itself. The Black Hawk helicopters cut through the Afghan night like deadly whispers, their rotors beating a rhythm that had become as familiar to Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez as his own heartbeat. Beside him in the cramped cabin, 11 other members of SEAL Team 6 checked their weapons, one final time, their faces painted with camouflage that made them look like warriors from another world. The green glow of night vision equipment cast everything in an otherworldly light, and Rodriguez could smell the familiar cocktail of gun oil, sweat, and the metallic taste of adrenaline that came before every mission. 10 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets, barely audible over the thundering rotors. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten, not from fear, but from the anticipation that always came before they went hunting. This was what they lived for, what they had trained years to do perfectly. Lieutenant Commander James Bulldog Patterson, their team leader, held up his hand and pointed to his watch. The entire squad nodded in unison. They had done this dance hundreds of times before, and each man knew his role like a pianist knows the keys. Patterson was old-school Navy, a Mustang officer who had worked his way up from enlisted ranks through sheer determination and an ability to bring his men home alive. His weathered face told the story of 15 years in special operations, with scars from Somalia, Iraq, and 3 previous tours in Afghanistan. Next to Patterson sat Chief Petty Officer David Tank Morrison, a massive man whose nickname came not just from his size but from his ability to blast through any obstacle in their path. Morrison carried the squad's heavy machine gun like it was a toy, and Rodriguez had seen him fire it with surgical precision while running full speed across broken ground. The man was a living, breathing weapon system. Rodriguez shifted in his seat and checked his own gear one more time. His HK-416 assault rifle was clean, loaded, and ready. Extra magazines were positioned exactly where muscle memory would find them in the dark. His radio was set to the right frequency, his GPS showed their current position, and his knife was sharp enough to shave with. Everything was perfect, just the way it had been on the 47 previous missions he had completed with this team. The target tonight was Taliban commander Hakim Rashidi, a bomb maker responsible for killing dozens of American soldiers with his sophisticated, improvised explosive devices. Intelligence reports placed him in a compound built into the mountainside, surrounded by natural defensive positions that made him feel safe from American retaliation. That was about to change. 5 minutes, came the pilot's voice again, and Rodriguez felt the helicopter begin its descent toward the landing zone. Through the small window, he could see the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains outlined against the star-filled sky. Somewhere in those rocks and shadows, their target was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about the next convoy he would blow up. Rodriguez smiled grimly. Bad dreams were coming. The helicopter touched down with barely a whisper on a flat piece of ground 3 kilometers from the target compound. Before the skids had fully settled, all 12 SEALs were out and moving, their weapons up and ready, scanning for threats in the darkness. The helicopters lifted off immediately, their sound fading quickly as they headed back to base, leaving the squad alone in hostile territory, with nothing but their training, their weapons, and each other. Patterson raised his fist, the signal to halt, and every man froze in place like statues. For 30 seconds, they listened to the mountain silence, letting their ears adjust to the absence of helicopter noise. Rodriguez could hear his own controlled breathing, the whisper of wind through the rocks, and the distant sound of a goat bell somewhere in the valley below. Nothing else moved. Nothing else breathed. They were alone. The squad moved out in a tactical column, with Morrison on point using his massive frame to break trail through the rocky terrain. Rodriguez took his position in the middle of the formation, where his skills as a medic would be most useful if things went wrong. Behind him, Petty Officer First Class Tony Spider Vasquez carried the squad's demolitions equipment, enough C4 to level a small building. Vasquez was small and wiry, with hands that could disarm a bomb or build one with equal skill. They climbed steadily through terrain that would challenge a mountain goat, moving with the fluid grace that came from years of training together. Each man could anticipate what the others would do, where they would step, how they would react to obstacles. They were more than a military unit. They were a single organism with 12 parts, each perfectly adapted to its function. The intelligence briefing had been thorough, as always. Satellite images showed the target compound built into a natural cave system, with multiple entrances and defensive positions carved into the rock face. The main building was 3 stories high, constructed of local stone that would blend perfectly with the mountainside during daylight hours. Guard positions were located at the corners, with clear fields of fire down into the valley where any approaching force would have to advance. What the satellites couldn't show was the number of defenders inside the compound, their state of alertness, or the exact location of their target. Those were the variables that made every mission a roll of the dice, no matter how well planned. Rodriguez had learned long ago not to worry about things he couldn't control. His job was to adapt and overcome, regardless of what they found when they reached the objective. After 2 hours of careful movement through the darkness, Patterson signaled another halt. They were now within 500 meters of the compound, close enough that noise discipline became critical. Rodriguez could see the target building outlined against the starry sky, dark windows staring down at them like dead eyes. No lights showed anywhere in the structure, but that didn't mean it was empty. Their target was too smart to advertise his presence with electric lights. The squad spread out into assault positions, each man taking cover behind rocks and natural terrain features. Rodriguez found himself behind a boulder the size of a small car, with a clear view of the compound's main entrance. His rifle rested steadily on the rock, scope trained on the doorway where their target would emerge when the time came. Patterson's voice whispered through their radio headsets, so quiet it was almost inaudible. Alpha Team, take the north side. Bravo Team, south side. Charlie Team, cover the back door. Execute on my signal. Rodriguez was part of Bravo Team, along with Morrison and Vasquez. Their job was to assault through the main entrance, while the other teams prevented escape through alternate routes. For 10 minutes they waited and watched. Rodriguez counted his breaths, keeping his heart rate steady and his hands calm. Through his scope, he could see details of the compound's construction, the placement of defensive positions, the narrow windows that could hide enemy guns. Everything was exactly as the intelligence reports had described, which should have been reassuring but somehow made him uneasy instead. The first sign of trouble came when Morrison spotted movement in a guard position that was supposed to be empty. A Taliban fighter was awake and alert, scanning the darkness with night vision equipment of his own. That meant their approach might have been detected, or worse, that this was a trap. Patterson made the decision that would save their lives. Instead of continuing with the planned assault, he ordered the squad to pull back to a safer distance and reassess the situation. It was a choice that went against every instinct they had, because SEALs were trained to be aggressive, to take the fight to the enemy without hesitation. But Patterson's experience told him something was wrong, and he trusted that instinct more than any plan. They had withdrawn only 200 meters when the compound exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness like deadly fireworks, and bullets began snapping through the air around their positions. Not random shots, but aimed fire from multiple positions, as if the enemy knew exactly where each SEAL was hiding. Rodriguez pressed himself against the ground as rounds sparked off the rocks inches from his head, the sharp crack of high-velocity bullets mixing with the thunder of automatic weapons. "Contact front," Morrison's voice boomed over the radio, his machine gun already chattering in response to the ambush. "We're taking fire from multiple positions." Patterson's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority. "All teams find cover and return fire. This is a planned ambush. Repeat, this is a planned ambush." Rodriguez rolled behind better cover and began engaging targets with precise, aimed shots. Through his scope, he could see enemy fighters moving in the compound, more than the intelligence reports had suggested. The realization hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. This wasn't just an ambush. It was a coordinated trap set specifically for American Special Operations Forces. Someone had leaked their mission, or the Taliban had become far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Either way, 12 of America's elite warriors were now fighting for their lives against an enemy that had been waiting for them. As bullets continued to snap overhead, Rodriguez heard Patterson's voice on the radio, requesting immediate helicopter support for extraction. but the nearest aircraft were an hour away, and Rodriguez wasn't sure they had an hour. The enemy fire was too accurate, too well coordinated. Someone was directing the Taliban fighters with military precision, and that someone knew how American Special Operations units fought. The night that was supposed to end with the capture of a Taliban bomb maker had just become a desperate fight for survival. And as Rodriguez would soon discover, they were about to face odds that even SEAL training might not be enough to overcome. The mountains around them were about to come alive with enemy fighters, and 12 Americans were about to find themselves completely surrounded with nowhere to run. The Taliban fighters moved through the darkness like they owned the mountains, which Rodriguez was beginning to realize they probably did. What had started as an ambush from the compound was rapidly expanding into something much worse. Enemy muzzle flashes were now visible on ridges to their north, south, and east, forming a deadly semicircle around the SEAL positions. The only direction not yet occupied by Taliban fighters was straight up the mountain behind them, and Rodriguez suspected that wouldn't remain clear for long. "Tank, give me suppressing fire on that ridgeline," Patterson shouted over the growing volume of gunfire. Morrison's machine gun roared to life, sending streams of tracers arcing through the night sky toward enemy positions 800 meters away. The bright streaks of light looked beautiful and deadly as they sailed through the darkness, but Rodriguez could see they weren't stopping the Taliban advance. More concerning was the radio chatter they were intercepting on enemy frequencies. Someone was coordinating the attack in English-accented Dari using military terminology and tactical concepts that no untrained Taliban fighter should understand. Whoever was running this operation had received professional military training, possibly from Pakistan's inter-services intelligence or even more sophisticated sources. Rodriguez shifted position, moving 20 meters to his left to get a better angle on advancing enemy fighters. Through his night vision scope, he could see Taliban forces moving in bounds, with some fighters providing covering fire while others advanced to new positions. This wasn't the undisciplined mob of irregulars that intelligence briefings often described. These men moved like soldiers, with proper spacing, coordinated fire patterns, and tactical discipline that impressed even Rodriguez. "Alpha Team, I've got movement on the North Ridge," came the voice of Petty Officer Second Class Jake Razor Williams over the radio. Williams was the squad's youngest member at 23, but he had already proven himself in Iraq and Afghanistan with an ability to see things others missed. "Looks like a full squad moving to flank us." Patterson processed this information while continuing to direct the squad's defensive fire. They were now taking incoming rounds from 5 different positions, with enemy forces attempting to maneuver around both flanks simultaneously. Classic small unit tactics, executed with a level of skill that spoke to extensive training and preparation. Someone had studied how American Special Operations Forces operated, and they had planned this ambush accordingly. The compound they had come to assault was clearly just the bait in an elaborate trap. Intelligence reports about a high-value target had drawn them into a killing zone that had been prepared specifically for a unit of their size and capabilities. Rodriguez found himself grudgingly admiring the tactical sophistication, while simultaneously planning how to kill everyone responsible for it. "Chief, we need to move," Rodriguez called to Morrison during a brief lull in the firing. "They're going to have us completely surrounded in another 10 minutes. Morrison nodded grimly, reloading his machine gun with practiced efficiency. "Where do you suggest we go, Doc? They've got the high ground on 3 sides, and more fighters moving up behind us." It was a good question with no easy answers. Military doctrine called for breaking contact and withdrawing to a defensible position, but every direction offered new problems. Moving uphill would be slow and expose them to fire from multiple directions. Moving downhill would take them directly toward enemy positions. Staying put would allow the Taliban to complete their encirclement and destroy the squad with coordinated fire from all directions. Patterson made the decision that would define the next phase of their battle. All teams were moving uphill to the ridge behind us. Leapfrog movement: one team provides covering fire while the others move. Alpha Team moves first. Williams, Vasquez, and Petty Officer First Class Kevin Ghost Murphy began the dangerous process of moving uphill under fire. Ghost was the squad's sniper, a quiet man from Montana who could put bullets into targets at distances that seemed impossible. He carried a customized M110 rifle that had accounted for dozens of enemy kills across 3 combat tours. The movement uphill was a nightmare of loose rock, steep angles, and exposed positions. Enemy bullets snapped constantly overhead as the SEALs bounded from cover to cover, using natural terrain features to mask their movement. Rodriguez watched Ghost slip and slide up the rocky slope, somehow managing to keep his rifle clean and ready despite the challenging conditions. When Alpha Team reached a position 50 meters uphill, they began providing covering fire for Bravo Team's movement. Rodriguez, Morrison, and Vasquez started their own climb, with Morrison's heavy weapon making the ascent particularly challenging. The big man moved with surprising grace for someone carrying so much equipment, but Rodriguez could see the strain in his movements. A Taliban round struck the rock face inches from Rodriguez's head, showering him with stone fragments that stung his exposed skin. He pressed himself against the mountainside and returned fire toward the muzzle flash, though he doubted he could see the shooter clearly enough for an accurate shot. The important thing was to keep enemy heads down while his teammates continued their movement. Bravo Team in position. Morrison reported when they reached the new position. Now, it was Charlie Team's turn to make the climb. Patterson, along with Petty Officer First Class Ryan Bullseye Thompson, and Hospital Corpsman Second Class Luis St. Morales, began their movement under covering fire from both Alpha and Bravo teams. Thompson was the squad's explosives expert, a former Army Ranger who had transferred to the Navy specifically to join the SEALs. His specialty was making things disappear in spectacular fashion, and Rodriguez hoped they would have use for his skills before the night was over. Morales was another medic, cross-trained in combat operations but primarily responsible for keeping the team healthy and functional in the field. The Taliban fighters were not content to simply watch the Americans withdraw. Enemy forces were now moving aggressively to cut off the SEAL retreat, with fighters visible climbing parallel routes up the mountainside. What worried Rodriguez most was their coordination and speed. These weren't farmers with rifles. These were trained soldiers who understood small unit tactics and had planned this operation in detail. Contact left, Williams called out as Taliban fighters appeared on a ridge 300 meters away. His rifle cracked repeatedly as he engaged the new threat, but Rodriguez could see more enemy forces moving to surround their new position. The higher ground offered better defensive positions, but it also made them visible to Taliban forces throughout the valley. Ghost had found a position behind a large boulder and was engaging targets with his sniper rifle. Each shot was carefully aimed, and Rodriguez could see enemy fighters dropping as Ghost worked his way through their ranks. But for every Taliban fighter the sniper eliminated, 2 more seemed to appear from hidden positions among the rocks. Patterson completed his assessment of their new position and delivered news that Rodriguez had been dreading. All teams, we're surrounded. Enemy forces on all sides, estimated strength between 60 and 80 fighters. Helicopter support is still 40 minutes out. Rodriguez did the math automatically. 12 Americans against at least 60 Taliban fighters, with limited ammunition and no prospect of resupply. The enemy held superior numbers, knew the terrain intimately, and had positioned themselves in prepared defensive positions. Under normal circumstances, this would be classified as a hopeless situation. But Rodriguez and his teammates weren't normal circumstances. They were Navy SEALs, trained specifically for situations where the odds were impossible and conventional tactics wouldn't work. They had weapons, ammunition, and most importantly, each other. If they were going to die in these mountains, they would make the enemy pay such a terrible price that the survivors would remember this night for the rest of their lives. All teams conserve ammunition and pick your targets carefully. Patterson ordered, make every shot count. Ghost, prioritize anyone who looks like leadership. Tank, save your heavy ammo for group targets. Everyone else, aimed fire only. The enemy fire intensified as Taliban forces moved closer to their position. Rodriguez could hear commanders shouting orders in multiple dialects, coordinating the final assault that would overrun the SEAL position. Somewhere in the darkness, rocket-propelled grenades were being prepared to blast the Americans out of their defensive positions. Rodriguez checked his ammunition supply and found he had 4 full magazines remaining, plus a partial magazine in his rifle. Not enough for a prolonged firefight against dozens of enemies, but enough to make them regret trying to kill him. He selected a target through his scope, a Taliban fighter moving between rocks 200 meters away, and squeezed the trigger. The man dropped immediately, but Rodriguez was already shifting to acquire a new target. The night erupted with the sound of incoming RPGs, their distinctive whooshing sound followed by earth-shaking explosions that showered the SEALs with rock fragments and choking dust. The Taliban had brought heavy weapons to the fight, which meant their small arms fire would soon be supplemented by explosives, designed to kill everyone in a given area rather than specific targets. RPGs incoming, Saint shouted unnecessarily, as everyone could hear the distinctive sound of rocket-propelled grenades being fired from multiple positions. The SEALs pressed themselves against whatever cover they could find as explosions walked across their defensive perimeter like the footsteps of an angry giant. Rodriguez felt the concussion from a nearby explosion as a wave of pressure that seemed to squeeze his entire body. His ears rang, his vision blurred temporarily, and he tasted blood from where he had bitten his tongue. But his weapon was still functional, his teammates were still alive, and the enemy was still advancing. He wiped blood from his mouth and continued firing. The Taliban assault was reaching its climax when Ghost's voice cut through the chaos on their radio frequency. "Unknown sniper on the high ridge," he reported, with professional calm. "Someone's engaging enemy positions from extreme range. Not one of ours." Rodriguez looked up toward the mountain peaks towering above their battle and saw muzzle flashes from positions that seemed impossibly distant. Someone was shooting at the Taliban forces from ranges that exceeded anything he thought possible with standard military weapons. The shots were spaced several seconds apart, but each one seemed to find its target among the enemy fighters attacking the SEAL position. Who would be shooting at Taliban forces from such distances? There were no other American units in the area, and no friendly forces had been mentioned in their briefing. Rodriguez felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air as he realized that somewhere in the darkness above them, a ghost was hunting. The mysterious sniper fire from the high ridges was having an immediate effect on the Taliban assault. Rodriguez watched through his scope as enemy fighters who had been advancing aggressively just moments before suddenly began seeking better cover, their coordinated attack faltering as squad leaders started dropping with precisely placed shots to the head.
Someone up in those peaks was shooting with a level of precision that bordered on supernatural.
"Ghost, can you get eyes on whoever's shooting up there?" Patterson asked over the radio, his voice tight with concentration as he engaged a Taliban fighter trying to flank their position. Ghost's sniper rifle cracked twice in quick succession before he answered. "Negative on visual identification. Range is extreme, probably over 1,000 meters elevation difference. But whoever it is knows what they're doing. I count 6 enemy down from long-range fire in the last 3 minutes." Rodriguez felt a strange mixture of gratitude and unease. The unknown sniper was undoubtedly saving their lives by disrupting the enemy assault, but the tactical situation made no sense. No American forces were supposed to be operating in this area, and the nearest Allied units were hundreds of kilometers away, so who was up there, and why were they helping? The Taliban commanders were asking the same questions, judging by the increasingly frantic radio chatter Rodriguez could monitor on enemy frequencies. Orders were being shouted in multiple languages with clear confusion about where the new threat was coming from. Several Taliban fighters had been pulled back from the assault to search for the mystery sniper, which gave the SEALs some breathing room but didn't fundamentally change their desperate situation. Morrison's machine gun chattered continuously as he engaged enemy fighters trying to advance up the slope toward their position. His ammunition supply was running dangerously low, and Rodriguez could see the strain in the big man's face as he rationed his remaining rounds for maximum effect. The enemy still had overwhelming numerical superiority, mystery sniper or not. "Movement on the south ridge," Williams reported, his young voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Looks like they're setting up a heavy machine gun position." Rodriguez shifted his scope toward the indicated position and spotted Taliban fighters manhandling a Soviet-era heavy machine gun into position behind a natural rock wall. Once that weapon was operational, it would devastate their defensive position with sustained fire that could penetrate any cover they had found among the rocks. Before anyone could respond to this new threat, a single shot echoed across the mountain valleys, the sound taking several seconds to reach their position. Through his scope, Rodriguez watched one of the Taliban fighters at the machine gun position simply crumple to the ground, his body going limp instantly. The other fighters dove for cover, abandoning their weapons setup as they tried to locate the source of the shot. "Holy shit!" Vasquez breathed over the radio. "That had to be at least 1,500 meters. Maybe more."